Now then. Who remembers all these lovely ancient VHS tapes that I got in an auction some time ago now? Because I still haven't done anything with them. I've got a bit of Blake 7. Got a bit of pretty much everything going, really. This is the rub of it. I've got lots of stuff which is very sort of my era, which this, whoever it was had collected over time. Bit of Blake 7, bit of UFO there. Anything and everything you can imagine from my era was here, and there are some sort of mini series here as well. So this, I've got sort of 6, I think it is, of these Battlestar Galactica tapes. Now, I've had them up on eBay, at least some of them, just to test the water. Not a nibble. No one wants VHS tapes. So what do I do? Do I take them to a recycling centre? Do I sort of do a little bit of a reminisce about the ones that are particularly meaningful to me, which I have a slightly separate pile? They would include things like Slipstream, which was Mark Hamill's return to movies here, which is a bit of a sort of a B-movie thing, but that is him on the front cover of the box there. And that was the first thing I believe he did after Return of the Jedi, would you believe? Before he did his voice acting stuff, he decided he'd be a sort of an anti-hero rather than a hero. So there's all sorts of these, and they might all justify some sort of analysis in and of their own sort of good selves, but that's going to be a lot of time, and I no longer have the capacity, I don't think, to sort of do video grabs unless I point the camera at a screen, and then obviously that becomes a copyright issue. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame though, because as I think I probably said when I first looked through these, they're very much of my era. There's a lot of sort of happy memories caught up in these VHS tapes, and it just seems a shame to just consign them all to the waste recycling centre. But that may be my only option, unfortunately. I've taken out the Blu-rays and so on that I think I can take to CEX and just get maybe a few pennies for those to put towards something else. But actually, these videos were by far and away in the majority of what was in the incredibly heavy box. But I've got to get rid of them now because they're just sat there gathering dust and not doing much else because no one wanted them on eBay. So let me know in your comments if anyone's got any really sort of clever ideas about places that take old tapes and repurpose them in any sort of meaningful fashion. Then by all means let me know, because I just don't have another clue as to what to sensibly do with them other than just bin them off, unfortunately. I do have one half idea in that I might take the sleeves out and do something creative-ish with the sleeves. That's about the one thing I can think to do that would sort of preserve some of the original tape without actually having the tape itself. Because, I've got to be realistic about this. They're an antiquated form of film and TV series delivery. The only thing that's really unique about them at this point in time is probably the artwork. So maybe that's the way to go with it. I don't know. It just seems a shame for them all to go to waste, but obviously, times do move on. I just wonder if there's some sort of, archive or something for these things that might or might not be interested in this sort of thing. So if you do know of anything, would you please drop me a line in the comments, and I will look into that side of things. But I think give it a week maybe, and then I'll have to take them down to the tip, one way or another. I have actually rescued a very old video cassette recorder from my mum's house, so it may be that would play some of these. It would actually be interesting to see how many of these do play, because these are probably bordering on 40-year-old tapes now, some of them, so they may or may not play. Interestingly, there were some that I smiled at being on VHS. So you got Lord of the Rings there. I would have thought that was perhaps actually sort of too young to be on VHS, if you see what I mean. It's probably one of those ones where they were just about to lose VHS as a format, but those are some of the last films that actually just sort of crept onto it before it just died out. I wonder what the last last published film actually was on VHS officially. But, there's some Harry Potter VHS and stuff scattered in here. There's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, But I'm sure they've all had DVD releases since. I even checked Slipstream, actually, and you can just kind of, buy it on Google Play or whatever. So that's definitely a thing. Yeah, but this is what I grew up with. I had bucket loads of these. I used to collect Star Trek: The Next Generation on VHS because I couldn't get it on Sky because I didn't have Sky. So I used to get those pretty religiously on VHS tapes at one point. It's crazy now looking back on it, because they're not even, they're big things. You can fit about 4 DVDs into the space physically of a VHS tape and hold more on it. So they were kind of doomed after a certain point inevitably. But yeah, this is a shame to see them go. Maybe you can do some sort of modern art sculpture out of plastic boxes with them. I don't know. but it's not, as I say, it's not just the tapes themselves. I don't even know. I think apparently it is possible to recycle elements of the tapes, but really it's only the plastic boxes themselves that will lend themselves to being recycled in that fashion, because they're pure plastic, whereas the tapes are a mix of things. It might even be interesting to pick a tape apart. I don't know, but I just feel sacrilegious. Is it weird that I feel sacrilegious saying I'm going to destroy a VHS tape? It is daft, isn't it? It's 2025. It's like, why is that a thing for me? I don't know. But as I say, I have tried to rehome them. No one's been interested. So if anyone's got any better ideas than me, please let me know in the comments. And that was it for this one, really. I just need to move these out of the way now so I can continue filming other things in a normal fashion. Cheers for now. Alright, well, before I do something with some of these, let's just have a quick look at some of these as a matter of interest, because I might have done this first time round, but it's really interesting just to look at these as a format and to think about how many franchises actually got formed and spawned off the back of these kind of very early, sometimes very early era films on these VHS tapes. So let's consider The Matrix. Now obviously The Matrix has had DVD and Blu-ray releases and everything else since, absolutely no question about that. But it was early enough that it still had VHS releases, and it's got this rather nice clamshell. These were these sort of soft clamshells that they released quite late on in the history of VHSs. I remember getting Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country in this as well, and liking the feel of it. It's a slightly sort of embossed kind of cover as well. You can always see it's sort of shinier than average. So just a different way of doing things, really, quite late on in the sort of the VHS era. Now, obviously, that spawned several different iterations of films off the back of that, and it was just one of those ones that was just on the cusp for VHS-ness, but nonetheless, of an era where those films were going to spawn sequels. Now, some of these are TV, some of these are film. $6 Million Man. Now, a lot of people sort of recognise it. A lot of people might recognise this gentleman as being Lee Majors, also of The Fall Guy, for example. Very much of my childhood. And obviously, we've got Cyborg now, Bionics, standard issue things. I mean, my son watched this sort of Disney show that's all about kids with bionic powers and all that sort of stuff. So this was the precursor to them, and again derived from a book, of course. But I'm not sure that we've ever had a direct sequel. There have been films, there were TV films, and Sandra Bullock was in one of them, actually, strangely. But $6 Million Man, definitely viewable at the moment, I think, on various sort of vintage channels. Now, the series, great show, scared the heck out of me when I was little. When I managed to record it or watch it at times when I shouldn't have been recording or watching it. And of course, recording it on a VHS tape was something that only kids were actually able to master, because only we were smart enough when VHS recorders were a thing. Yes. Now, this has had a reboot, of course, with Morena Baccarin in it, relatively recently, featuring some guest stars from this iteration of the series. But again, this is very much VHS era. I'm sure it's been released on DVD, but that was definitely VHS era when it originally came out. So I've got sort of fond memories of that one. Now, I just asked a little helper when this came out, and this is actually sort of, this is 2000. So I have no idea what it's doing on videotape, but it is. And I love the fact that it's purple. That seems to be a very Galaxy Quest thing to do somehow, having a purple VHS cassette tape for itself. But again, very beloved film with some very good people in it, which probably saved it from being totally obscure. So Tim Allen, Sigourney Weaver, Alan Rickman, now passed, of course, sadly. But, just a fun film. Now, there are those of you watching this, I dare say, who will be of a certain age where you'll be wondering what on earth is he talking about. And I appreciate that. But this is actually partly for you. Because, some of these are going to be classics. Others are more personal. But, it's worth you being aware of these things so you know where your modern content is coming from, for the most part. Because a lot of these do inspire what people are watching now. 2001, A Space Odyssey. Classic, hard science fiction film. And again, interestingly, this particular edition, of which there have been thousands, is in a nice clamshell case. A soft clamshell case again. So I think that's quite a nice version of it. But you can get that on Blu-ray very, very easily. So I encourage you to have a look at that one. Stanley Kubrick, very, very famous film. Do have a look at it. The original one before the sequel, but the director's cut of it. Again, very, very famous film of this era. Renowned for its very, very dark tone. And interestingly, it's quoting Harrison Ford so much on the front, when it's actually really it's a Ridley Scott film rather than a Harrison Ford film. I mean, it's both. But again, really, really well done film of its sort. Again, based on a book. Dune, the original conversion of Dune to a film, featuring people like Patrick Stewart. And, again, this is one that I would recommend to you, simply because I grew up with it massively. I loved it, and it was pretty dark. For me to be able to watch it, it was pretty dark. But my dad loved this film, so it's got that sort of linkage for me personally. But it's a good film, and it is very much what the modern version of it is based on, obviously, because again, book based. More obscure. I'm going to dash through this before my power runs out. Wing Commander, a film that very few people have heard of, but has some quite good people in it, and it is loosely, I would have to say, based on the video game of the same name. It's a little bit of a romp. I quite enjoyed it as a bit of a giggle. And it's got some, moderately decent space combat in it, but, it's just one of those things. Again, it's one of those ones that appeared in this collection that made me think this guy was really, really similar to me, and I'm sad that he's gone, or he's having to get rid of this stuff, because he's very, very close to my heart, a lot of this stuff that he had. Space 1999, Channel 5 filmic version of the series Destination Moonbase Alpha, with a little tiny eagle in that bottom right corner there that you might be able to see just. So it's sort of, again, this is very much of my childhood. I love the series. I've done Lego models of it. I've got current toys of it, or current-ish toys of it, all that sort of good stuff. Great series if you can find it. Very hard science fiction in the first series, goes a bit bonkers in the second series. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, again, very, very famous science fiction film of a bygone era. But again, watch it if you can, because it inspires a great many other science fiction films at the end of the day. No two ways about it. What else have we got? Let's have a look. Again, Forbidden Planet. Very, very old film now, but very much of its day. And again, a classic that other things have borrowed from over time. So again, if you can watch that one, just do, basically, because it is it's a very, very seminal science fiction film. Again, very beloved of its time. Silent Running. Won't go into too much detail on it, but again, it's one of those ones where I've actually got the Blu-ray of this now, but I haven't rewatched it yet. It may not, I don't know if it's going to hold up to scrutiny, but it's definitely one that was one of the big science fiction films of my childhood, because there weren't that many science fiction films as I was growing up. It's not like it is now. There was no CGI, so if they're going to put spaceships in, they've got to build spaceships and everything, you know? Very different era, but, you know, doesn't mean they weren't good stories, though, which is why I'm encouraging you to go back and have a look. Moontrap, a Star Trek guy not doing a Star Trek thing, Walter Koenig in this film, quite dark, sort of. These days it would feel very, very low budget, but as I say, back then it was kind of one I got it from the video store, classic sort of video store rental type film, this, and yeah, just I enjoyed it for what it was. It was quite sort of schlocky horror kind of stuff that probably not many people have seen it, but I quite enjoyed it because it was science fiction, full stop. Right, just going to see if this works as a concept after a brief pause on my end. Slipstream. Mark Hamill in his first post-Return of the Jedi role, apparently. Now, I associate this with a Biggles film, in which Biggles time travels. It's probably called something similar to that, but it's just one of those things. In my memory, these two are linked for some reason. I think because the adverts for them appeared in the same comic. It might have been a Transformers comic, I'm not sure, but for some reason they are linked in my head. It's got a bit of AI going on. It's got a bit of sort of end of the worldness, post-apocalyptic stuff going on. It is on Google. I did look, and it is on Google, so there is the potential that you could go and see that one if you fancied it. Obviously, I think Mark Hamill, in fairness to him, is probably more known for his voice acting roles post Star Wars than he is his filmic roles post Star Wars. He also appeared in Sequest DSV. True story. Next up, look at this. Now, here's a franchise that started in the 80s, Terminator. But that's the first Terminator. And then we get, of course, then we get Terminator 2, Judgment Day, which was a whole different thing. I mean, that sets so many precedents for things to come. It's just not true. The use of CGI in this one is incredible. When you consider that the first one was all sort of stop motion and practical effects, it's crazy. Then, of course, we've got Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines there, still on VHS. Still featuring Arnie on the front cover, but now he's got some Terminatrix company. So, just a funny little sort of trilogy there that were part of that collection, but I can completely understand why. Planet of the Apes. That's got to be the worst spoilery cover on any sort of VHS release going. That's just daft. Why on earth would you do that to the poor film? Really stupid. But again, a very, very classic science fiction film which has spawned reinventions of it down the years and its own sequels in its own time as well. So, I mean, it's actually quite an interesting film, that in a sense. I've never really thought about Planet of the Apes like that, but the fact that it managed to spawn its own sequels, I wonder if that was actually the first science fiction film to do that. That's really interesting. I've never thought about that before. I mean, if you think about the Superman films, for example, they had, a lot of sequels to the Superman film with Christopher Reeves. But the Planet of the Apes films are probably quite early doors in terms of having a science fiction series that also had a TV series as well, have additional films made at around the same time. I've never thought about it in those terms. That's an interesting thought process to have gone through. The Philadelphia Experiment. Now, again, if you were a sort of a hard science fiction fan, you might have heard of this one. But this is all about the time travel and a time traveller. And as it says on the front there, 41 years ago, they opened a hole in time and it stayed open. Now, this has had a modern remake as well. It's one of those sort of films that just won't quite die and it lives on in sort of TV movie mode, But again, I just found it a really interesting story. A little bit disturbing, actually, in a sense, but a good story nonetheless, if you're into your science fiction. Now, Logan's Run, again, one that had a series as well, but no sequels that I'm aware of. But again, it's just one of those ones where I don't think I've ever really sat and watched it. But it's one of those interesting ones where it's a kind of engineered society kind of thing, and I think once you reach a certain age, you have to be killed. And Logan's Run is about two people who decide that they'd rather not be killed, thank you very much. And they go on to explore the wider world beyond the world that they've always lived in and known, basically. So it's one of those, you know? Saturn 3. Saturn 3 is a pretty wacky one. Farrah Fawcett and Kirk Douglas and Harvey Keitel, as I recall. Yes, those on the back, Harvey Keitel there. So again, another very sort of its era science fiction film. Bit of a, I wouldn't say it's a video nasty as such, but it is quite dark, and there's some very sort of its time bits to it, and sort of, a bit of sort of naughty substance taking and that sort of thing. But it's science fiction of its era. Speaking of which, The Last Starfighter, one of the very first films to use CGI very, very heavily, indeed, i.e. exclusively, for its outer space elements. But it's also a sort of teenage, coming-of-age type idea as well. It's two films in one in that sense. The tagline is, "The adventure of a lifetime is about to begin." Now, this has been a really interesting one for me, because I've been trying to find it on Blu-ray for the longest time, and it is out now, but it is quite hard to find even now. I don't know quite why. I guess there must have been a rights issue over who actually owned it, and trying to get sort of licenses to release it and so on. But it does exist digitally, but I think for quite a while it didn't, and it had a bit of a sort of a gap. But the Death Blossom maneuver during the film is one of these sort of apocryphal things that anyone who's seen it at the right time remembers it very, very clearly as being awesome. And that's one of the takeaways from the film for me was that. But it has some quite sort of creepy elements to it for a film which is rated PG. But I bet this could be an edited version of it that's PG. I wonder if the original one was actually rated a little bit darker than that. But it's a fun romp if you can find it. It's just a tricky one to find, basically. Again, very, very classic film. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's probably been spoofed and remade and echoed in who knows how many films down the years. But it's one of those ones where being a Spielberg film, you should get it under your belt at some point if you're at all into your science fiction, because it's effectively a sort of a first contacty sort of idea. With some sort of twists to it, but it's definitely one of those you want to get. Now, if I haven't already covered this one, because I have covered that one actually. Just another different version of 2001, basically. Blue Danube is in my head, and then of course this is a harder film to find again, but again is on Blu-ray now. 2010, the year we make contact. Now this has got some really good people in it. If you can see down the bottom here, I'm going to crib from that list quite heavily. We've got John Lithgow, we've got Helen Mirren, Roy Scheider, of course, who's in Jaws. Other people whose names I don't recognise, but it had some heavyweight people, and it was well acted. It didn't have the impact that 2001 had, but I liked it. It's got a great spaceship in it. I recommend that one as a follow-on to 2001. TV series mode now, more modern, Farscape. I really enjoyed Farscape. Ben Browder would go on to feature in Stargate, as would Claudia Black, who's this lady here. Now, is it typecasting? I don't know. They actually did a Stargate episode where they spoofed Farscape as well, which was hilarious for people like me who actually knew what Farscape was. this was the first couple of episodes on VHS. Fortunately, I did take up getting this on DVD. But again, at the time, this would have been a bit borderline in terms of when it came out, I think. Because I think it did come out in 2000 and something. Possibly, I'm trying to think, when did I first start watching Farscape? Ooh. Yeah, it's borderline, I would say. So, you know, it was probably one of the first series I actually bought as a series first on DVD, actually. So that's the kind of era we're in there. But it was just indicative to me of the kind of guy whose collection this was, that he would have Farscape in there. Jim, it's a Henson production, not Jim, but his son worked on that, and it's got a really interesting ongoing plot actually as well. So I do suggest you have a look at that one if you've never heard of it. Equally, this one, Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict, is based off an idea that Roddenberry had, which he didn't live to see through. And again, it's just one of those ones where I think it started quite strongly, as I recall. Then it sort of meandered a little bit, and I guess maybe they were trying to fulfill his full idea for it, but maybe they ran out of budget or time or a bit of both. I don't know, but I liked it stylistically, and it integrated CGI very well into itself for a TV show, I felt. So I'm interested to hear if anyone else remembers this one. But again, it's one of those ones where if you're of a younger age, you might want to have a little look at that, because this was that period just before science fiction really started to proliferate off the back of CGI becoming cheaper and easier to do. So, you know, you might want to have a little think about that one. Luc Besson's The Fifth Element, featuring Bruce Willis. Again, very classic science fiction film. Watch it if you can. It is one that gets mentioned elsewhere, but it's kind of one of those where it's probably sufficiently classic now that you might feel it's worth watching. I quite like what the French do with science fiction as well. They've got a very they've got a French tone, funnily enough, in the way in which they do it. But it's just I find it interesting. Contact. Jodie Foster there, Matthew McConaughey. I don't know how you pronounce it. Everyone makes fun of the way he says stuff. I don't know. In a respectful fashion, I hasten to say. But again, that's a really interesting film as well, because for me personally, from a science fiction story point of view, I find it quite intriguing. So you might want to find that one. Of course, one of the very famous science fiction stories, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Look at that. And this is obviously a tape. This is the original BBC TV series of the radio drama that they did of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I believe it was in that order. The little "Don't Panic" there, of course, as it should do. That's Marvin the Paranoid Android there in his TV form. And just again, something that those of us of a certain age have very, very fond, never-ending memories of, basically. If you watched it at the time, you know what I mean. This I just threw in there just because it made me chuckle, because this was a box set, and I thought, I wonder why they've done a box set of this one. It's Alien Resurrection on VHS, which again is really late to do a VHS of, but it's the making of Alien Resurrection and Alien Resurrection. You can't fit the film and the making of on the same video, so you have to release it separately. That is what you had to put up with before DVDs and Blu-rays were a thing. You had to have another videotape for the extras. Well, for an extra. So count yourselves lucky, kids, because that's what you had to put up with. You had to have an immense amount of storage space available to you. So last pile, very quickly. Stallone, Judge Dredd. Now, this for me, growing up, was the first, I'm going to say it's a serious attempt to do Judge Dredd from the comic 2000 AD, which I was a big reader of, big fan of. And I mean, I like his uniform, and I liked a lot of the concepts in this, because they did draw from concepts that were in the comics. Now, was Sylvester Stallone a good person to put in as Dredd? Probably not. It probably needed someone more obscure. Why? Because it shouldn't have shown his face, and it did so repeatedly. and very early. You never see his full face in the comics. That's not a thing. And they went ahead and did it probably because Stallone insisted on it, which is unfortunate. Other characters in it, like Mean Machine, yes, fair dues, very accurate. So I have a certain amount of time for this because I think things like, the lawgivers and the lawmasters and everything else were very good and were modelled well off the comics. And I had time for it for that reason, but I just think it was just a little bit too, I don't know, a little bit too tongue-in-cheek for my taste at times. The core, I don't know if I quite like the core. It probably channels my Jules Verne Journey to the Centre of the Earth sort of childhood vibes, but I actually felt it was well done of its sort. And it also features them trying to land a shuttle in a rather unorthodox fashion, which gets bonus points for me because I like space shuttles. So, it's all good at the end of the day. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the core. Don't think that's really supposed to be there. Just a random Thunderbirds DVD in the middle of it all. The Abyss, James Cameron. Again, classic film. If you haven't ever happened across it, which you might not have done given the volume these days, but try and watch it. Its message is perhaps, I don't know, is it dated? Probably not so much, really, in many respects, because we seem to be in that sort of cycle of history at the moment. But yeah, it's a really well done, scientifically accurate underwater adventure. Basically, is what it boils down to. So, worth thinking about. I don't know if I like Mars. I can't remember if I really got into Mars Attacks. It's based on a series of American bubblegum cards, if I'm remembering rightly, and I've done zero research there. Jack Nicholson, Glenn Close, Annette Bening, Pierce Brosnan, Danny DeVito, very, very good people in it. Tim Burton film, I believe, isn't it? But just very, very funny. It is sort of hilarious. Some really very good special effects in it, and it is just yeah, it's just an alien invasion, but hilariously done, basically. So again, you might want to look into that one. One of my big-time childhood favourites, Buck Rogers in the 25th century. Frozen in time, a hero from the past awakens to save the future. Awakes to save the future, I apologise. So, Buck Rogers, Colonel Wilma Deering, isn't it, I think? And Tweaky there on the front cover. Yeah, the Space Age Marvel based on the famous 1930s comic. It's 1930s they came up with Buck Rogers. So again, you can go. That's nearly 100 years ago. That's nearly 100 years ago, and they based the TV series in the 80s off a 1930s one, which was 50 years ago, and we're now nearly we're sort of nearly 40 years on probably from when Buck Rogers first aired. That's just crazy. But again, for me, whooshing my Corgi Starfighter around, that's this one's fault. I've no idea where that would be available now, but it has come out on DVD. I've got a DVD box set of it elsewhere. Similarly, Blake 7 has just had a re-release on Blu-ray with redone effects, but a seminal BBC science fiction TV series that was quite dark. It was very sort of, of that era of BBC where they weren't afraid to go to quite dark places on a Saturday tea time. So that was, I'm pretty sure that's when it aired. So again, really good hard science fiction writing in a BBC show. So, along with Doctor Who, it's of that time zone, it was that kind of feel to it. So, certainly recommend it if you've never seen it. Because again, it's one of those ones where it will have been formative for some people. I don't know why I put this in here, but Thunderbirds, the movie, I don't know, strange sort of redoing of it with kids in charge of the Thunderbirds vehicles because the main Thunderbirds team gets incapacitated, kind of. You'll love this, will you? Will you really? I think some people do have quite a lot of time for it. It is Thunderbirds, it's somewhat close to the original material, but there are no puppets involved, so there you go. And of course, again, another one that we've had a remake of, to my mild surprise, but in fairness to them, Independence Day, I thought they did quite well with the sequel. I think it could have been far, far worse than it actually turned out to be, in fairness to them. So I've got to give them some kudos for this. This is also a lenticular cover. I don't know if the camera will pick this up, because it might be a sort of a human eyeball job. But basically the White House is getting blown up there if you hold it at the right angle. I can't even make it do it for me now, but it was lenticular when I last looked at it. Yeah, it is. It's perhaps just not, it's slightly old lenticular. You might have picked that up on that, you might not, I'm not sure, but it is there in theory. So, just a nice little gimmicky cover for that one, if nothing else. That's kind of why I threw it in there. But again, Independence Day, probably a good sort of, moderate level, if you like, science fiction film to bring people into science fiction awareness. It might have peaked, and I'd be interested to hear in the comments if this actually sort of introduced anyone to science fiction. Because it did so well in the box office, didn't it? And I just wonder if it did actually introduce a lot of people to science fiction as a concept. I wouldn't be surprised if it did. Do I think it's the best science fiction film ever? Not particularly, no. Does it have some very good actors in it? Yes, it does. So, yeah, I think it's a very watchable science fiction film. You can kind of put your brain in neutral for it. But then I think the sequel was very clever in what it did with it and how it played it. And, I've definitely got time for it. I'm just surprised it took them so long to do the sequel, really. Quite risky to leave it that long, I think, in many respects. But I guess it probably did okay. So, those are the only ones I was particularly going to go sort of run through. I should give sort of honourable mentions to Battlestar Galactica, and because I've got a sort of a series of those tapes, and those ones I think I'm definitely going to keep the covers off because they're quite old school covers. But it just amazes me that this guy had collected stuff that was very much in keeping with the sort of stuff that I was watching growing up. So for me, as I said when I first opened these, it was kind of fascinating working through them because there's very little here that I hadn't watched, very, very little. In fact, I've probably watched all of it, one way or at some point or another. But if you've never sort of gone back in time with your science fiction, because obviously you've got a lot to choose from these days. With are the Marvel movies science fiction? Well, sometimes. The Guardians of the Galaxy series, yes, probably more so than any of the others. But, there is a lot of really good science fiction that exists from before 2000, which, you might be interested in having a look in if that is the sort of thing that interests you. Because you'll see in those films and those TV series a lot of the things which have now developed and blossomed given the sort of effects and the scope and the budgets that they now have these days. So, I'm just an old timer, so you ignore me at will, of course. But I just thought you might be interested in that because there is so much you could be watching now. I think it's very difficult to know what to watch. There must have been a point in time at which you could have actually watched all the science fiction that had ever been produced in a lifetime. I think that time is probably past now. I don't think it's possible to watch every piece of science fiction that's ever been released at this point in time, in 2025, because you'd be there beyond a lifetime. It's just not, it's just the way it's gone. So I would definitely suggest that you have a look at a few of these, which, probably deserve the term classic, just so that you're informed. And it means you'll get more of the in-jokes as well in some of these other more modern films that are sort of, taking the Michael out of the older films. What can I say? What do they call it? Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. That sort of idea, So on that bombshell, I will leave you there. Do like and subscribe as ever, and let me know in the comments which of these films you remember, you like, you dislike, and tell me what on earth to do with these VHS tapes. Thank you very much. Goodbye.